Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We are going to get started in a minute. Crystal, let me know if you wanted to do any kickoff, or we'll just give it a minute and then let people join and just dive right in. All right.
Yeah, just a few housekeeping things. If you'd like to join the stage, you'll have to raise your hand, and then if you'd like to participate and message any of the speakers, you can DM them by clicking their profile and clicking the direct message. And they'll be able to answer any questions that you have, and keep it private and for the most part on the messaging side. So if you also just want to access any of their LinkedIn and things of that sort, you can just go back to the event, click it, and then you should be able to get all of the links that we provided and their information. And don't forget to follow them and me for any future events.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal.
Good luck.
Thanks. All right, we are so excited to be here. So, hello, Fishbowl, and thank you for joining. My name is Rachel Serwetz. I'm the founder and CEO of career coaching company WOKEN. I am here today with Lesia, and she is the director of career success at the Fullstack Academy. So, this is our third time speaking on Fishbowl. We're really excited. And just make sure, like Crystal said, to check out our profiles, and that way you'll be notified of future conversations. Today, we're actually kicking off a series, and we have two more upcoming events in the same vein as today. And what we're doing here is highlighting professionals who are actually engaged in their job and happy at work. And look, that doesn't mean it's a walk in the park every single day, all day, and it's nothing is perfect. But we want to learn from Lesia, and we want to learn from her story. And what I'm going to do is try to tease out the lessons of what can you do, where did she do things really well or maybe not as well, to figure out how to explore and identify and pursue your best fit career path. You know, it always seems like kind of a pipe dream, and today we want to make it really practical and really realistic to figure out what career path is suitable and aligned with you. So we're going to do the interview for about 30-40 minutes, and then we're going to have time for audience Q&A for about 20 or so minutes towards the end. And yeah, definitely raise your hand, and we will bring you up to the stage. So before we dive in, I'm going to give you a super quick intro to who I am. My background, I started out in the corporate world. I was at Goldman Sachs and then Bridgewater Associates. But alongside of my job, I was career coaching informally by way of referral, hundreds of acquaintances and friends of friends. And I saw lots of patterns and challenges and started to create some innovative frameworks. From there, I actually did a coaching training through NYU and got certified through the ICF. I later did a tech MBA through NYU Stern. I've done career coaching through a variety of organizations like WeWork, the Flatiron School, Columbia University, Project Activate, and others. And I've been building my own company for about 5.5 years. So WOKEN is here to guide professionals through all career stages and phases and goals and challenges to really just simply help you be intentional with every career decision that you make, in a nutshell. And of course, I'm happy to talk about anything of my journey, but today we are going to learn from Lesia. So, Lesia, tell us, where did your career journey start? You know, it's funny because we want to hear, like, was there early experience? What was the earliest things where, you know, you remember trying to figure out your own direction? Any moments or experiences that helped you, maybe not give you the full answer, but sort of push you in some sort of direction for your career direction?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And hi, everyone. Really great to be here this afternoon. My career journey began really early on. I was your very quintessential, ambitious overachiever. And when I was in high school, I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to a high school that actually provided what was referred to as a specialized learning center. And this one was the International Studies Specialized Learning Center, and it had a focus on politics, on geopolitical science, global affairs, and so those things academically had always really been an
Oh,
interest to me. And for as long as I can remember growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer. And that really started to kind of come to fruition and kind of come together in high school. I definitely wanted to go to school in Washington, D.C. I had visions, for those of you who might be familiar with like the West Wing, of like walking around with a Josh Lyman backpack around the hill. And so that's really where it started. And then I ended up doing some of those things. I went to American University in Washington, D.C., and I have my bachelor's in political science and international studies. I interned on the Hill. I interned at a couple of different nonprofit organizations trying to figure out what I was interested in, what lobbying was, all of those different things. And then the pivotal moment really of that came when I was taking the LSATs my senior year, moment that I just no longer wanted to be a lawyer. I was like, I don't want to take the LSAT. I don't love standardized testing. And so I finished the exam, but then I had to kind of leave and decide what I was going to do. And so that was a really kind of pivotal moment for me of saying, okay, I know that I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to practice law in the traditional sense, but what are some of the ways that I can be intertwining my interests in political science and community work and governmental affairs and all of those things? And when I graduated from college, I actually got a job as a communications assistant at an IP law firm based in Virginia, which I hated. Absolutely hated it. It was like a non interactive environment. We actually all sat with our backs to each other in the room that we were in. It was a very odd experience for someone who had been so used to engaging in debate and conversation in college. So I ended up quitting that job. And I moved back to the New Jersey, New York area where I grew up as a kid, and really then decided, I have to figure out. My parents were very gracious. They allowed me to boomerang myself back to their house in New Jersey. And my mom's only requirement really was is that I could like take a little bit of time to figure out what I wanted to do. But I obviously had to do something. Not getting a job was not an option at that point.
mhm.
So that was really, I think, the first crossroads that I had in what my career journey was going to look like.
Oh my goodness, I can't wait to like dive into the next phase and all the phases because I love this is my favorite thing. And just understanding your decision making process is what I want to help others with. So first of all, I just want to super quickly highlight like your courage to pause was so critical. You took those LSATs and you listened to yourself. And sometimes we don't even know why I don't want to be a lawyer, like whatever the reason is, but your gut told you. And you had that courage to pause and pivot, even though you had put in a lot of time and effort already. And I see sometimes people will put in, time and money towards degrees. And then they feel like I have to just keep going because I put in all this effort. So the courage to pause and pivot. I just have to pause to highlight that. I love how you also mentioned you were asking yourself these questions. So, facilitating self reflection, so important for career exploration and making time to ask yourself these questions. And one of the things you mentioned was, how do I combine my interests, right? So, I love that because a lot of times a aligned career path is a combination of like, oh, I like to do A, B, and C. What could that look like, right? And I like that, even though your next role was something you hated, you were still saying what could be a good next step. You were doing your best to say incrementally, let me be thoughtful at each moment when I have the next opportunity. And, I know it's going to lead you eventually to where you stand today, but the thoughtfulness with every job change, with every opportunity to try to inform what would be a better next step. It's an informed experiment, oftentimes, as I say. Okay, so tell us, you hopped back to your parents and now you were ready to figure it out. So what did you do to figure it out?
So I ended up doing what a lot of people do. And in 2006, when I was like coming back from my parents, there weren't a ton of online portals for job. Like LinkedIn was not a thing. Indeed was just up and coming. So the opportunities to even find career opportunities as like a new college graduate were very much limited in versus what they exist today. So I sometimes think to myself, even working with the students that I work with, is that I sometimes wish I had access to all of the things that they did. But I knew what I did have access to. And I started applying for jobs. And it was actually on, I think, monster.com. I found a role for a professional development assistant at a real estate law firm based in Manhattan. And basically what that meant in a nutshell is that attorneys, so I still knew I wanted to work with attorneys. I was interested in like their development and, supporting the work that they were doing. I just didn't want to practice law myself. So this, I felt like, was actually a really interesting way for me to learn about what it meant to work in a law firm. One, also in a space that I wanted to be. I think everybody who grew up maybe in the New York, New Jersey area dreams about commuting to Manhattan, taking the subway, going to lunch, all of those fun things. And so when I got this job, what it entailed was essentially facilitating professional development events for attorneys. So attorneys need, in order to maintain their licensure, need to fulfill something called continuing legal education credits. And if there are any attorneys on the call here, I'm sure you're probably either sighing or rolling your eyes about the work that has to go into that, and hopefully your firms are providing that service. But what my team did was basically put on those events. We found the speakers, we chose the topics, we planned the catering, we found the event space. We did everything but present the event. So from that experience, I really learned a lot around event management and product management, project management, and communication. And it really got me interested in how people stay up on their skill set and the things that are required. And you would see different attorneys attending different areas of interest. So even though I barely knew what they were talking about in some of the legal jargon they were using, it was really interesting to see how many varieties of legal education there were out there, and how people picked and chose what they needed to do based on their specific areas of practice. So that was my first the first job in Virginia was definitely like my first job post college, but I refer to my experience as a professional development assistant as like my first real career move into doing what I was doing next.
Well, what I love that you were doing was, the three-part framework I always use is role versus industry versus environment. And so, like, at first you started out thinking, I want to be a lawyer. And then you said, what would it be like instead to be in that industry in a company that dealt with law, but maybe I'm not sitting there as the lawyer. I'm in a different role, in a different capacity. So, I've seen similar things. I coach a teacher, and then she ended up doing project management, but at an education based company, right? So when you have a passion for something, right? Separate what is the role that I can do? What is, what are my skills? And you mentioned project management and you mentioned all these different things. What do I want to be doing all day versus the industry or the type of company or the type of sector that I want to be in? Those are two separate ways to say, how can I incorporate interest, whether it's in my role or whether it's in the industry? And then thirdly was environment. You were like, I actually wanted to commute. I wanted to go in person. I wanted to do all these things. And look, we learn from every experience. You may have said, I want to try this, whether you like what you liked, what you didn't. With every single job, we reflect on that for the next time. But, that's a great three-part framework to always come back to in terms of how did the last opportunity go in terms of role, industry, environment, and where do I want to go next? Role, industry, environment. It's just a good separation. I think sometimes we munge the two and it's just like, what is my path? Well, there's ways of dividing up, how you can incorporate interests in these different ways. And, it also sounds like you learned, in professional development, like I kind of call it like upskilling, and now you're at Fullstack. So maybe it sparked your understanding of like, oh, there are just so many different ways that people need to develop professionally. And I wonder if that was at all connected to, what you do today. But take us after that role. Like, how did that transition to your next step? Like, when did you move on from that, and what made you decide to move to your next step?
Yeah, I'll say it just kind of an aside too, because I think this will come up a little bit later. So I think also working in New York got me the ability to really also re-engage with the Ukrainian community in New York. So if anyone's looked at my background on LinkedIn and kind of preparation for all of this, I am also a very active and proud Ukrainian American, and I currently serve as the president of the National Executive Board for the Ukrainian American Youth Association. And I was co-opted back onto the board for the first time in 2007. And so, we'll talk, I think, a little bit about this and how this rolls into it. But so much of what I learned around project management and event planning and kind of just team management also started in that spot. And it gave me the opportunity to kind of reinsert myself back into the Ukrainian community here on the East Coast. And it was just fun. It's something, it's who I am as a person. So I think it's what I do now is really a melding of both of those things. But from the professional standpoint, I always like to joke, don't work for a real estate law firm in 2008. You will lose your job. And so the firm that I worked for had actually been acquired probably right in the beginning when I started working there in 2007. And so I worked there for almost a year and a half. And then the financial crisis in 2008 took place. Our firm ended up dissolving. The partners started kind of jumping ship, and we basically defrauded on the credit agreement that we had with the bank that was subsidizing us because we had so many partners just leaving the firm. And so I was very lucky to have a very supportive boss who was based in California. And she had basically said, Lesia, continue to come to work. You're paid until the day we tell you not to come to work anymore, but do a couple of things that we need you to do in order to clean up our files and get rid of stuff, but absolutely go on interviews. So I was there for about a year and a half. I really loved the work that I was doing, and I didn't at that point see, that I was going to willingly go, but basically I had no choice at that point. So we, started kind of disbanding everything, and I was going on interviews at that time, to the point of which when I got my next job working at NYU, I actually wasn't even able to collect unemployment because I got hired, was off for the week of Thanksgiving, and then started the next week. So for those of you who've ever collected unemployment, know that there's a little bit of a wait period in there, but I really did not want to wait. I wanted to move on to the next thing. And again, was really lucky in having a boss that was like, we know your time is ending here, so use it wisely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what were you looking for? Did you say, okay, I know I like the role and I know I like what I'm doing all day. So were you looking for similar things? How did you think about your direction at that point?
Yeah, I think at this point, it's a little bit daunting to be 23 and unemployed and laid off. And obviously that affected a ton of people. So I think, a lot of where I was looking was like, okay, what kind of job can I get? I knew I still wanted to work in New York. It's actually ironic that I didn't consider looking in New Jersey or commuting that way. Everything I've done professionally has been in New York City, which is probably its own interesting story. And basically, I just started applying to a lot of executive assistant, program manager positions. And my next step really came when I was applying for what is called an administrative associate role at NYU. And I applied for one actually at NYU Stern. And because the world is very small, one of the women who worked in their HR office actually was Ukrainian and grew up going to camp with my mom. And so my mom remembered this. I shot her a quick email, and she kind of plucked my resume out of obscurity and said, let's definitely do a couple of interviews. And then that's actually how I ended up getting the job as an executive assistant to, at the time, the Associate Dean of Students for the NYU Stern School of Business in the undergraduate college. So that role, I think my skills in organization and time management really helped me, what I had seen, even working in a very dynamic environment in a law firm. But then, and I probably can't harp on this enough, I do it for my students as well. It's all about networking, and it's all about reaching out to people and asking if they can make an introduction and using your network in a constructive and meaningful way. And so I think one of the biggest lessons I learned from there now is this person opened a door for me into what was now going to be almost 10-year experience going forward. I obviously didn't know that at the time, but it was her kindness and her ability to do this solid for me that really opened up my experience in education.
So you were at NYU for 10 years.
I was at NYU for 10 years. I was at the Stern School of Business in their undergraduate college, both in the dean's office and then their office of student life for 5 years. And then I spent almost 5 years at the NYU Wasserman Center for Career Development as a career coach. And when I left, I was managing all of their employer engagement for the Central Career Center.
Wow. Okay, amazing. I do see a question. We are going to hold questions for the next 10 to 20 minutes and just finish up hearing about Lesia's wonderful career story, and then we will absolutely open it up to questions. So please hang tight. So first of all, I love the reiteration around networking. I mean, it is the mechanism to get new opportunities, but it's also so important to just like learn from professionals, right? Like, what do they do? How can you understand what's out there? How can you get information on what these roles are so that you can decide what direction makes sense for you? And I have a ton of resources on my website if you guys want any free guidance around what networking questions should you even ask to learn effectively, and how can you leverage networking properly. I know a lot of people have hesitations around it, but it's worth it to find ways to understand networking so that your hesitations don't hold you back and you can use that tool in a way that is comfortable and effective to get you ahead to your next step, whether that means learning more or whether that means finding openings. So that's such an important point. So, Lesia, tell me, when you were throughout your 10-year experience, like, I'm curious, any role, it sounds like you held a few roles at NYU. So, what I'm always interested in is when you got any of your next roles, was it something like natural and organic that came about? Was it a conversation with your manager? Was it something you sought out and you sort of went to that other team and wanted to go join them? Like, how did you make each of the steps and the changes and like sort of know what you were looking for next? Like, how did you continue to clarify with each of those changes throughout NYU or even afterwards? To take us into some of those decisions with each of the next few roles that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of the underlying current here is that this is kind of how I've always looked at kind of my own career development. That it's a little bit like a pendulum. That if you are happy with what you are doing and you feel like you're doing a good job and you're making an impact on the work, there is really no reason to leave your job. Obviously, we all want to be promoted and acknowledged, and those things should absolutely come. But especially when you're starting out, there's so much that you can really be learning, and I think it is really important and valuable to think about it in that way. Are you doing the work that you're supposed to be doing and that you're getting paid for? Are you learning a lot, and are you having an impact on that? And then if you like your job and you like the people that you work with, there's really not kind of this desire to go. It's when the pendulum starts to swing in the other direction of maybe I'm not learning as much, maybe I've outgrown this position, maybe I'm not enjoying who I'm working with as much, or I'm just ready to move on. That's when I've always taken it as an indicator that I should start looking for something else. And I have to say that over the course of my 10 years at NYU, I was incredibly lucky in the positions that I held, the teams that I worked on, the mentors and the leaders that I supported, to the point of which when I made the decision to leave, it is one of the things, I think, the hardest things I've ever done professionally. So I was in the dean's office. I served as an executive assistant for about 3 years. And then when I enrolled in NYU's master's in higher education and student affairs, that really for me gave me the impetus that I really wanted to work on the student affairs side. I loved working with students. I loved seeing what they were doing with their careers. I loved being able to put on programming that was meaningful for them, both socially and professionally. And Stern as an environment really offered a ton of that experience based on the student demographic that enrolls there, the employers who want to work with those students, the faculty and the staff. And I was really lucky that when there was an opening, it was very fluid for me to move from one office into another. The undergraduate college was all one big space. And so when there was an opening to go downstairs and work in student life, I applied, I interviewed, and they gave me that opportunity. And I was in the Stern School up until I finished my master's. And that was almost 5 years. I started my master's like 3 years in, but was there for a total of 5. And that's when I really started looking for something different. I wanted to work in a different office. I wanted exposure to different types of students. Stern is a very unique community, again, in the types of students who enroll and go there. And I wanted to see what else was offered across the NYU landscape. And I actually had made a friend in my higher ed program. We're still friends to this day. She was working as an executive assistant to the executive director at the Wasserman Center. And so we got to talking like assistants do. And she had mentioned that there was an open career coach role. And because, again, the world is small, one of the senior directors of the Wasserman Center was actually the daughter of my boss at NYU Stern. And so this is not to say that I have had an in for every job, although it might sound like at this point. But again, these were people that I had developed really good relationships with. I obviously was a good employee. And so they really helped facilitate that interview process. And that is where I got bitten by the career coach bug. So that is really the first step of where I started working with students a little bit more professionally on resumes. And so I was a coach for about 2.5 years. I took over during that time all of NYU's career fairs. So that was a huge event management space. If any of you are NYU grads and remember those lines, I apologize in hindsight. But I really then started working very closely in that career and development space on what do resumes look like? How do you present yourself to employers, which certainly would lay the groundwork for the work I am doing in my current role right now.
I love it. I love it so much. And so a few lessons that I'm hearing, right? So number one, internal mobility. Like you are leveraging within the world. Obviously, NYU is huge and not every single person's at a big company, but are there roles, are there teams, are there projects at your current company where you can lean in closer to your interests? Can you collaborate with other teams? Can you maybe move roles or move teams at your organization? Or maybe there's a sister organization owned by the parent company, or maybe there's a vendor or a partner that you guys work with, external stakeholders. Who is around you in your immediate world? If you were to like peek over the fences a little bit, what are those other teams and those other projects that you can think about? I love that you were just sort of exploring like, what does this organization have? And yes, it sounds a little sometimes serendipitous, which could be the case. But first of all, networking, the fact that you knew that assistant, that's how you uncovered the opening, right? So building relationships is the way of uncovering opportunities, but also being intentional to build relationships so that you can see who else is doing what. The other lesson of what I love, and I know this sounds so simple, but you just kept mentioning like, I loved doing this. I loved helping professionals. I loved helping students. I loved helping with the programming. Like your ability to just figure out what you love doing, then you were saying, what are the roles? What are the teams? Where can I physically go be paid to do that? And I know it sounds so simplistic, but I think a lot of people, I don't want to say overcomplicate, but sometimes there's so much around this like upskilling world that we live in that it's not about like what skills should you have. It's like, what do you want to be doing? What do you love doing? What are you great at? What are you natural at? And how can you understand yourself and then say what physical, roles and teams exist in the world, right? So to me, exploration is all about how do you get to know yourself and how do you simultaneously get to know the world of career paths. If you do those two things at the same time, you're going to do exactly what Lesia was doing in figuring out her path. And, it just sounded like with every incremental job change, you were basically just asking yourself the hard questions of what do I like and where can I go do the next thing that is just as interesting or more interesting than what I was doing last time. So it's that active self-reflection with every change and with every opportunity for your next step.
Yeah. And I think one thing I'll add here too is that, especially when I was an assistant, no task to me was too small. I remember one of the first jobs, I actually started at Wasserman the week that the fall semester started. And again, any of you who work in higher ed know that that is basically like all hands on deck. The place is a circus. And I remember working on the career fair team and I was like making name tags for employers. And I think that that is something that I've carried with me into kind of what I do even when I manage my teams now. There is no job that was too small. Like there was no job that was too insignificant. There was no job that was like beneath me to do. I wanted to be able to help my team. I, let's be honest, wanted to make a good impression and show that I was there to be a good colleague and to be a good teammate. And for me, it was like you have to figure it out. You have to figure out how the place works. I do kind of speak a little bit in cliches, but I think one of my biggest ones that I have really held to me, like, you either have to sink or you have to swim. And for me, sinking was just not an option. Like, I was going to figure it out. It didn't mean that I didn't fail or make mistakes, certainly along the way, but putting the time and effort and diligence into doing things really shows your care for what it is that you're doing. And for me, I always wanted to inject care into the work that I was doing, because otherwise, why was I doing it? Because there are millions of other things we all could be doing with our time. And the thing you do the most, go to work, if you're not injecting a level of care in there, you're probably not doing the right thing, and you're probably not happy with what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I love that word, care. That's so great, because you want to care personally, you want to care professionally. And when you care, you show up better. I just love that. I love that. Tell us, what do you think, if you had to just pinpoint one or two of the best things that you did to help you clarify your best fit path? I know you took us through a lot of these different decision points around your career, but like, if you had to pinpoint just one or two things, or whether it was people or experiences or tools, and then secondly, I want to hear, how has it benefited you in your life to feel like you're aligned in your job?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, it was realizing, the first thing was definitely was realizing what my network was, and understanding how I could leverage that to at least have conversations with people around things that I was interested in. So I did have one experience that, in my career, that I don't take back, but that I wish, if I hadn't done it, I probably wouldn't be at Fullstack. So I am thankful for that. But I went into recruiting at Citi, working with their investment banking team, and about 3 months into the job, I decided, I was like, this really isn't for me. I'm not cut out to be a recruiter. But the reason I did that job was because I wanted to see how employers worked, and what it was like to be an employer to recruit students after having worked at NYU for so long. So I think for me, there were definitely opportunities where I didn't make career missteps, but that they were not aligned with what actually made me happy. It didn't bring me joy. I didn't find like I was finding any meaning in those things. And so again, I really reflect on that pendulum metaphor that I talked about earlier. I really would sit down and say to myself, like, am I happy? Do I like the people that are here? Do I like getting on the subway and going to work every single day? And that, the job is always going to be hard. Work is never going to be fun. There are some days that you will hate your job, but it doesn't mean you hate your work. And I think for me, if I was able to kind of organize myself in a way that, even if on the hardest days, that I was making some small steps forward in terms of my own professional development or the professional development of my teams, that to me, I think is really meaningful. And that is really what kept me aligned in what I was doing next.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the grass seems greener, or like your curiosity allows you to want to experience something. So you were like, oh, I'm on the student side. What would it look like to be on the recruiting side? But, I see that with a lot of people. They're like, oh, I've only ever worked at a small company. Let me go figure out what it looks like to work at a big company, or vice versa. Remember that you can use informational interviews to understand the day to day and the role and the environment and the culture and the experience of something that you haven't yet experienced, because it is possible that it may not be a fit for you. So, for example, like, what are the differences between a small company and a big company? If you can get to know the commonalities between those different things, you can make an informed choice. And maybe that means never going to a large company or never going to a small company. So, it's okay to learn and say, look, I've never experienced this. Let me go understand it, right? In order to make a good decision. I help people learn about paths where very often they'll be like, I've got different options. Once I learn about it, I realize this thing actually isn't a fit for me. And that's before I go try it. So, how do we learn whether we like something or not before we go physically do it? Informational interviews, networking, research, and reflection are critical components to make each informed decision at every single stage and step. But sometimes that curiosity sort of gets the best of us. And sometimes we feel like we want to try it or we should try it, but you just want to be as informed as you can. And remember that you can always learn before you go pursue something. The other thing that I love that you said was, the sort of job versus the career path, right? So when you love your work, you could say, here's my mission statement. I want to support students to grow professionally, or whatever your mission is. The variety of different roles or companies where you can go act on that mission may look very different. A company culture, one may be great, one may be not great. You might have a great team or a great boss or not. So the realities of the variety as to where you can go act on a certain mission or pursue a certain career path in different roles or different companies, you want to separate the two, right? Which is generally the right path for me, versus how do I then get to know the specifics of each of these companies to find the place that is a good environment and a good fit for me, right? But as you said, nothing is perfect. So I always say, which challenges do you want to handle, right? Like if a job's going to be hard, like which problems do you literally want to be solving?
Absolutely. And I think I think that leads into that question, the second question that you had asked about what the biggest benefits to feeling aligned with your career path are, is that you're able to make those decisions. Like I'm able to look at what my potential career path going forward will be, and I am able to kind of say, okay, I know I'm good at these things because I've been doing them for 15 years and I have the experience and I have the backup to kind of support my expertise as a career and program professional. And so I know that that is something that I'm going to carry with me because one, it's joyful to me to work in that environment. And then I think the second part is that it gives you the ability to kind of say, okay, well, what is supposed to come next? Where am I not maybe as aligned in whatever current role I'm doing, to
Right.
then say, okay, where will I find that alignment going forward? Where have I not been given the experience or the exposure to this thing that I really want to develop so that I am a well-rounded professional, can still obviously do my job, but can also give in there. So I think that it becomes a lot easier to sit with the discomfort of the things you don't love about your
Right.
job potentially when you are mostly aligned. It's much easier than as an objective participant. It's not as emotional because if you hate your job, it's really hard to be unemotional or objective about what is happening to you and how you get out of those potentially not great circumstances. But I think being aligned does give you the opportunity to then understand, are you happy continuing what it is that you're doing? Are you still making that impact? And do you feel supported and served as an employee? Or two, are there gaps, and how do you then begin to identify what those gaps are and how they can be addressed in other experiences? And that's not to say that all of those things need to be a job. It certainly is around career clarity and what we've been talking about this afternoon. But for me, I've been able to identify some of those gaps in the community work that
Yeah.
I do in my side jobs. And I think that's just as important because, sometimes it's not the right move to make a career change. And you have to identify other ways so that you can still show up as like a happy, productive person.
Totally. I mean, a holistic element of things is so important, right? We might have room for improvement to, get involved with our community. We might say, I need to work on my physical health or my mental health. I mean, there's any number of holistic sort of life and self development areas. And our job is one way that we can, grow and get fulfillment, but it's not the only way. So that's exactly right. Tell us, having been in a job, that you said joy, you said that you care, you said that I want to wake up every day and go to this job. So how has that benefited you just in your life? Like, do you see that affects you at all, like just personally or even physically, mentally? Like, I'm just, if you're open to share honestly, I am curious, how does that affect you as a person?
Yeah, I think for me, I think it both has positive and negative effects. Because again, nobody's job is perfect, nobody's work is perfect. And there are days that I like storm around my apartment with my hands raised up in the air, fuming about some decision that we've made that I don't agree with. And I take 5 minutes and I like do all of those things. And then I get back to work. But I think, it has been really interesting for me personally to see the combination of benefits that I can provide to other people. So like I don't own my own coaching business, but I've certainly reviewed resumes for friends or colleagues on the side. And I'm not at the point where I'm opening up my own business or doing anything like that. But I think I've been given the opportunity really to use my professional experience to help support, individuals who are looking for jobs, and being able to provide them with tips and tricks to be able to expand their own networks, and just to sit down and talk about like what you don't like, what you do like. And sometimes it's good to be that buffer for people. So I think for me, that's given me that kind of side piece of that I can direct my energies when I'm feeling frustrated or like not good about what's happening during the day onto someone else. I think from my work life balance, I mean, I think we've all probably suffered from this in a way. When you are connected to your work, it is hard to shut it off. Because you always feel like, okay, I can give a half an hour more. And I work remotely. Fullstack is a fully remote organization. So I am coming to you from my living room in Long Island City. And so it can be hard to shut off, and it can be hard to kind of draw the parallels of those things, and really kind of shut the work off for the day, because there's always one more thing that can be done, or there's always one more call that can be taken. And so I think that's affected my life work balance. Unfortunately, with everything that's been going on in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, it's given me the balance to say I have to shut off at a certain time because I need to switch to this other work that I am doing. But I think those are some of the challenges that I've certainly faced. But I will definitely say there are periods of time where I have been abjectly miserable at the work that I was doing, and I could feel myself not in a good mental space. And that's where I really needed to kind of decide, like, what was I doing? Was having a job worth it? Could I afford to take time off to figure out what I wanted to do? And I've been lucky to have opportunities come up at the right time that I haven't had to take that. But there were definitely times when I was like, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? This just isn't for me, and I hate it. And it's sometimes hard to crawl out of that. But I think, like I said, I've been very lucky to be able to move out of some less positive opportunities into new ones. But I'm just like everyone else, who definitely had those struggles.
Yeah. Well, I love that you were always using those moments as like a learning opportunity and a tool to say like what's going well, what's not going well, how can I adjust this, how can I figure out and just simply understand what's happening in order to make that better next step. So use your feelings as a signal, as a tool to understand how you're doing, what's going well, what's not going well, and how to inform that for your next step. So I love how you were always using it to your advantage, really, and learning from it. But as you can see, there's the perspective on how a job can either make you miserable or not. And I do agree with you. When you're engaged at work, it can sort of take over. But for me, the relief in like I know what I'm meant to be doing in my life. And that is just, I love that, when you feel that certainty, you can just simply dive into the work versus like, I do support a lot of people where we're questioning where am I meant to be? What work makes sense for me? And that I personally believe is something you shouldn't have to question for your whole life. We want you to focus on what you're great at and having that productivity and the innovation that the world needs from you, right? So that's what we want. We want you to figure out your direction so that we can reap the rewards and so that you can reap the rewards of saying, I know this is the work I want to be doing, the path that makes sense for me, and we can just double down on that, right? We don't want you to have to waste all this time and energy um worried or confused about where you belong in the workforce. And that's what we want to help you figure out. So
Yeah, and
let's
I would
open it
definitely
to Q&A.
say,
Yeah, go
no, so
ahead.
I would definitely say one last thing before we open it for Q&A. Your gut is never wrong. Like, all of the things that I did that I knew were not for me, I knew within probably a couple of days of starting those things. I knew it when I started my first week for that IP law firm that I worked for in Virginia. I knew it when I worked at Citi. Again, really exciting experience and like really great people, just not for me. Like, I felt it in my gut that it was not for me. And that, that's how it was specifically applied to me as an individual. But I have often shared this with both friends and colleagues alike. Like, it is incredibly easy to lie to other people and tell everything that is great. It's a lot more challenging to lie to yourself, because your
Yeah.
body will pick up on it, your mindset will pick up on it, and you will start to like experience those things. And so, one of the biggest pieces of information that I can tell anyone is that your gut is probably right. and you
Yeah.
should listen to it, and listen to it quickly enough so that you're able to make positive decisions or make moves if you need to, if you're in a situation that's less than ideal, or something that ended up being something that you didn't think it was going to be.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. That is so true. And, sometimes it actually is easy to lie to yourself because we protect ourselves by storing that stuff in the subconscious or avoiding thinking about it because we're scared about how to make the change or how to figure out what's next or, how do we go forward. So sometimes people do bury that stuff, but you're exactly right to say, be open to be honest with yourself and to be honest with others. That's the thing. Like if you were networking, I always tell people like it's okay, like don't feel like you need an answer at the, family Christmas party to be like, what are you doing with your life? You could be like, well, I'm learning and I'm exploring and I'm actually looking into A, B, C, and D and I'm trying to figure out which one of those would be the best fit. Do you happen to know anyone who does that? Like if you're telling them what you're looking into, maybe they can actually help you. So don't feel like people care a lot less than you think that they do, and like they're not thinking about you all day, like we're thinking about ourselves all day. So just be honest with like what you're considering, what you're looking into, and maybe they can help. So be honest with others and be honest with yourself, and that means giving time for reflection, whether it's journaling, whether it's meditation, whether it's finding a coach, a peer, a mentor, a therapist. Like if you have ways to facilitate active reflection often, you're asking yourself, it's okay to tap into my gut. It's okay to know how I feel. It's okay to understand that because it's going to allow me to make it better. And I know sometimes that's scary and we want to avoid it, but find a support system. Like I think some people think that coaching is like, oh, I have to be ready to like job search. Like you might just want to talk about your mindset. You might want to talk about your hesitations and fears and get yourself feeling ready to be able to take any action. Like I always say, like, let's learn before we take any action. You don't want to be doing job search until you feel 100% ready and certain as to where you want to go next. So remember that you can find the middle ground of like the in between. What are you not sure about? How do you work through that? You don't have to jump from A to Z. Let me just go on the job boards and apply. What if you can figure out like maybe you have open questions, maybe you have uncertainties, maybe you're not sure about the direction. That's an okay space to be in. Career exploration is literally a phase of figuring out what it is that you want before you job search. So know that, like, meet yourself where you are and allow others to do the same and find support to just dabble in whatever you're currently feeling, because that's the only place you need to be. Is what is it I'm feeling right now? Just jot it down, brain dump. What are you sure of? What are you not sure of? And go find a way to maybe get some of those answers. And sometimes the answers are reflection from yourself. Sometimes answers are sources of information from other folks. So on that note, let's do a little Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have a question that you'd like to ask. And really the goal here is career related questions, right? If you're figuring out your direction, if you're not sure how to do that, if you have a question based on what we chatted about today, really any career related question of something you're navigating. And what can we answer? In the meantime, I'll keep an eye out for hands, but we can keep going to give you some more food for thought. But please do raise your hand if there's anything that's on your mind. Um, while we get some questions going, Lesha, is there anything we haven't yet mentioned that you would tell someone, anyone, it could be any stage career person, really, if they're just simply figuring out, their best fit direction, like anything beyond what we've already chatted that they can either do or think about to, increase that clarity?
Yeah, I think a couple of the things that are helpful when you're trying to figure out your best fit, or kind of figuring out what that experience is going to look like for you, is three questions that I've kind of always asked myself is, what do I like to do? What skills are needed to do that thing? And have I tried it yet? Because I think like you were saying earlier, Rachel, it's about, you know, doing career exploration. It's around having conversations. It's around maybe something a little bit smaller scale than going in and applying for jobs and saying, you know what, I want to transition to this field, but I don't know that much about it. So I think, That's where I would start. And for me, again, I always kind of pivot back to the things like I knew what I liked to do in high school. Like I knew the things that interested me. And I'm not saying that I'm using my political science or international studies degree in my work right now, but those are still areas of interest for me. And so it made sense about the things that I was interested in high school around like debate and writing and political science. That's what made me be a poli sci major in college, which is where I learned how to communicate and write out my thoughts and make,
Mm.
logical arguments that were backed by reasoning. And so those things then developed into obviously things that I, leveraged in my job search. So I would really start very micro. Like I would look at your own set of experiences and things that you have done, whether it's a side hustle, whether it's a club or activity, whether it's community work that you may be doing, and think about, okay, you obviously spend time doing all of those things. What are some of the things that you do in that experience that you really enjoy, and are those things that you can then translate into thinking about a job and a career, because those are the things that you're going to do well. Those are the things that are going to appear the best to an employer when you talk about them during an interview. They'll see your excitement and all of that. And I think that is something that people often forget about. They don't think about the outside experiences as often as they think about the job or career related ones as to contributing to their own professional development. So those, I think, are the three things that I always think about when I continue to think about what my best fit career is, what potentially is my next step post full stack when that time comes,
Yeah.
and what am I thinking about doing in that space.
Yeah. So many good things in what you just said. So, like, number one, be holistic. You can think about any past experience, even if it was like a personal thing, like outside of the job. Like, especially when you think about industries of interest, you can think about hobbies or topics that you like to learn about, problems that you care to solve. There are companies in that sector. The role that you play is totally different than the industry you can be in. So, looking holistically at all the things that you've chosen to do or taken on, whether it was within work, within school, an outside volunteer. Funny enough, in my early corporate days, I volunteered for 3 years at a nonprofit doing career coaching. I chose to do that nonetheless on Saturdays for like 3 hours. Okay. So why did I do that? Right. So look at things you sought out. And then to, go a step deeper, you were saying, oh, what do you like doing and have you tried it? So another great lesson here is go try things. Now, there's two differences here between like, oh, like what full-time job am I actually going after? You want to feel informed and use informational interviews to know what direction you want to pursue. But if there's small ways of dabbling in things that you want to test out or get involved with, just put yourself in those environments, whether it's some sort of committee or membership or volunteer or self-driven side gig or side project or even research or networking. I mean, there's so many ways of getting increased exposure and involvement. When you know you're interested, how do you lean in one step closer to get involved, even in a small way, right? Even if you're not like, oh, I'm ready for this full-time job, but how do you, get exposure to the things you're interested in and then see where it takes you? Um, Again, we're open to Q&A, so let me know if you have any hands in the audience here. But while we're waiting, I do have another question. So, Lesia, when you are seeing people interview, say you're hiring someone or you're just coaching people in job search, what do you think stands out to you from a candidate? Like, what's a compelling story? Who do you think is the person that gets hired, right?
Yeah, I think a compelling story is focused on a couple of different things. The first thing, why are you there? Like are you interviewing because this is a job that you're really interested in doing, or are you interviewing because somebody decided to look at your resume and said, "Okay, maybe this person can be good." 9 times out of 10, if you're interviewing because it's a job you're interested in, it's going to be a positive interview experience, even if you end up not be getting selected as the job or being someone that they're making the final decision for. Employers, recruiters are not idiots. And so I think, we all know why someone is there. You need a job. We have an open role. You want to get paid. Like let's call a spade a spade. Nobody's interviewing or job searching because it's fun. It's not. And I will say that with 15 years of career development experience. It is one of the most unique and stressful things you will ever do is basically submit yourself up for evaluation for a job. But the people who I have found that really are the most compelling kinds of job seekers are the people who understand their own why. Why are you there? What can you provide to that employer, and what can they provide to you in return? And so I think that's where I have seen really successful candidates. They understand and they're able to make the connections between what they've done previously, what they may be doing in the moment, and what they want to be doing in the future. And knowing that whatever role they're applying for is going to be instrumental in that piece. I would say the second thing that creates a really good, compelling story is someone who is a genuinely authentic and nice person. We spend more time working than we do anything else. And whether you're in an in person, a hybrid, a remote role, you spend most of your day coexisting with your teammates. And so nobody wants to hire someone who's going to be a bad teammate. And I think the people, and obviously we've so all certainly I'm sure hired folks who ended up not being what they seemed, but hopefully for the most part you've hired really great colleagues. I can say we've got a great team at Fullstack that we've been able to think about that from that it is genuinely nice people who want to support their team and make showing up to work every day not a pain, because you know you have someone in there in the trenches with you on the days when it gets really hard. You have somebody in there to celebrate the accomplishments of your team. And so I feel like the compelling interview stories really come from individuals who are excited about wanting to work and learn on that team and getting to know new people and their skill sets and their strengths, and just being like a nice person to show up. It sounds very simple, but I think we've all worked with colleagues who've maybe been difficult to work with. And so we tend to look, for that person, because anybody can do the job, anybody can have the skill set, but can you do it in a way that's going to be positive, I think is super important when employers are hiring and onboarding individuals.
Right. I mean, I think we forget that it's not just the hard skills. I mean, they need to make sure you have the experience, but if you're looking for the right job that makes sense and is a fit for you, like don't forget they're also hiring a human being where your traits and how you operate and how you think and how you communicate and how you relate to others and how you handle challenges, it's all so important. It's not just the hard skills. And so show up to the interview as a human. You don't have to be fake. You don't have to be robotic. Like if you sound too rehearsed, they're going to smell that, right? And so you don't have to be perfect. We all have strengths and weaknesses, but show them that you're willing to grow and willing to be honest with yourself and others, and show them like what would you want out of a teammate, right? How can you show up the same way? So don't feel like you have to be perfect, but 100% I agree. The best interview is someone who is letting the person know, here's who I am. Here's how I handle these different things, because then they have more confidence that they actually got to know you in the interview and they know who they're hiring. Because if you're sort of fake, they're not sure they got to know you, and then it's kind of like reduces that confidence in hiring you as a candidate, right? To your earlier point about the interviews, I always say interviews and even networking is a mirror into the job, right? So what problems do you want to solve? Who do you want to talk to about what, why, when, where? Like what work do you want to do? And then you go find the interviews and the networking that mirrors that, right? And so don't just like check the box, applying. Remember that these are conversations, and you could be in any number of those conversations, different interviews, right? Different types of roles, different types of teams, different types of companies, different types of industries. So choose your direction carefully, thoughtfully, as we're talking about today. I know we just have a few minutes, so I just want to kind of make sure everyone knows where to find us. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn, searching my name, Rachel Serwetz, and also Woken. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, either at Woken or Get Woken. And our website is iamwoken.com. We always offer a free initial coaching call if you are ever interested in getting any support. And we will have the recording up as well. Lesia, please tell us where we can find and connect with you as well.
Yeah, you guys can find me on LinkedIn, Lesia Harhaj-Kudryk. I know it's in the marketing material, so I will not spell it out for anyone. And if there are any tech employers on this call, if you are looking for engineering, cybersecurity, DevOps, data talent, any tech needs, you can definitely reach out to me at lesia.harhaj@fullstackacademy.com, and we'd love to connect you with our job-seeking alumni.
Awesome, awesome. And so thank you all for joining. Thank you so much, Lesia, for joining today. And please follow us. We do have 2 more of these chats, one on April 20th and one on May 25th. And hopefully we'll continue this series. You know, my goal here is to make sure we can learn from people and their career decisions, right? Our decisions are not always perfect, but if we can learn from others and how they're making career decisions, hopefully we can apply those tips and best practices to ourselves to be as informed, intentional, and thoughtful with every single career decision that we make. And that is our mission here. So I hope this was helpful. Please stay in touch. Please connect with us. And I hope you all have a great, wonderful rest of your day and week.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Fishbowl team, for hosting us.
Yes, thank you.